Hi, my name's Alex. I'm 24 and after bouncing between a few jobs here and there, I recently landed steady work at a small auto shop just outside my hometown. It's not glamorous, but it feels good to be somewhere that isn't just a paycheck. The place has character. The walls are stained with years of grease and oil. The floor has cracks filled with old tire dust, and the air always smells faintly of gasoline, no matter how much you sweep or mop. Still, when I pull on my coveralls and step inside, I get that sense of belonging I hadn't felt in a while. The crew is a mix of personalities. Some guys are young, eager, and a little too hyped up on energy drinks. Others are older, calmer, and carry themselves like they've been turning wrenches since before I was born. I try to keep a balance, learning from the veterans while still pulling my own weight with the younger crowd. Nobody likes the new kid who acts like he knows everything. Among the older mechanics, there's one who stands out more than the rest. Harold. He's about 60. Short gray hair under a faded cap. Hands that look like they were carved out of steel. The guy knows cars better than anyone I've met. He can listen to an engine for a few seconds and tell you what's wrong before even lifting the hood. Customers trust him blindly, and honestly, so do I. Watching him work is like watching someone play an instrument they've mastered. Smooth, efficient, never a wasted movement. But Harold's reputation comes with baggage. Everyone at the shop knows he drinks. Not just a little. Sometimes he shows up with the faint smell of it still on him. At first, I was shocked nobody called him out, but the longer I stayed, the more I understood. He's too valuable. The boss turns a blind eye. The younger guys joke about it, and the rest of us quietly let it slide because at the end of the day, Harold still gets the job done better than anyone. On my first week, I got paired with him on a tricky repair, an old pickup with electrical gremlins. I watched him work while trying not to mess anything up. He barked at me once or twice, but not in a mean way, more like a coach who expects you to pay attention. At one point he lit a cigarette, took a drag, and muttered, "Kid, cars are simple. People are complicated. Always is remember that." Then he dove back under the hood like he hadn't just dropped a line that stuck in my head for days. Breaks in the shop are always noisy. Guys trading stories, laughing, phones buzzing. But Harold keeps to himself. He'll sip from his thermos, lean back on a stool, and stare at nothing in particular. Sometimes his hands shake just a little before he steadies them on his knees. Nobody mentions it. It's like an unspoken rule that his demons stay off limits as long as he keeps the work flowing. For me, being the newcomer means I'm usually the one sweeping floors, fetching tools, and handling small jobs that don't matter much if I screw them up. Honestly, I don't mind. Every little task feels like a step toward proving I belong. And little by little, I start feeling part of the crew. The jokes start including me. The older guys nod at me instead of ignoring me. Even Harold grunts my name sometimes, which I take as approval. I didn't know then how much he'd end up shaping my time at that shop, or how his life outside those garage doors would drag me into something I never expected. But in those first weeks, all I saw was a man everyone respected despite his flaws, and a job that finally felt like the start of something solid. A couple of weeks into the job, I was finishing up a long shift when the boss pulled me aside. He had that tone like he was about to hand me a favor disguised as a responsibility. "Alex," he said, "do me a solid. Harold's in no shape to drive. Can you get him home?" I glanced over. Harold was slouched on a chair in the corner, face red, eyelids heavy, mumbling to himself as if carrying on a conversation nobody else could hear. He hadn't touched a car in the last few hours. I hesitated, not sure if I wanted to get involved, but when the boss stares at you like that, you don't exactly get to say no. So I nodded. "Yeah, I'll take him." It took both patience and muscle to get Harold into my car. He staggered, cursed under his breath, then slumped into the passenger seat like a bag of bricks. By the time I pulled out of the lot, he was already snoring. The kind of deep, careless sleep that only comes after too many drinks. Driving him through the darkened streets felt strange, like I'd crossed an invisible line. I wasn't just the new guy at the shop anymore. Now I was part of the mess everyone tried not to talk about. His house wasn't far. Quiet neighborhood, modest two-story lawn that looked like it got just enough care not to stand out. I parked by the curb and nudged him awake, but he only groaned. So, I unbuckled his seatbelt, hauled him out with one arm over my shoulder, and half walked, half carried him up the driveway. That's when the front door opened. She stood there holding the handle, framed by the porch light. Laura, mid-50s maybe, but you wouldn't guess it right away. She had that polished look of someone who still cared about herself despite years of marriage to a man who clearly didn't. Her hair was neatly styled, her blouse tucked in, her eyes sharp and alert. For a moment, I felt like I was intruding into something private. "Oh, thank you," she said quickly, stepping aside as I helped Harold across the threshold. "I didn't expect." "Well, I appreciate this." Her voice was warm, steady, nothing like the chaos clinging to Harold. We got him onto the couch. He collapsed there instantly, shoes still on, one arm dangling. Laura sighed, shaking her head with a look that wasn't angry, more resigned. She draped a blanket over him and then turned to me. "You must be Alex. He mentioned the shop hired someone new." I nodded awkwardly. "Yeah, that's me. I just didn't want him driving." Her smile lingered in a way that caught me off guard. "That was kind of you. Most wouldn't bother." She motioned toward the kitchen. "Come sit for a moment. Let me at least make you some tea." I hesitated. I wasn't sure if it was right, but her tone left little room to refuse, so I followed. The kitchen was tidy, the kind of tidy that doesn't happen by accident. A faint smell of lemon polish hung in the air. She moved around with practiced ease, filling the kettle, setting mugs on the counter. When she finally sat across from me, she leaned in slightly, her chin resting on her hand. "So, how are you finding the shop?" I gave the safe answer. "Busy but good. I'm learning a lot." She nodded slowly, studying me. "That's good, Harold. Well, he used to bring out his work home, always full of energy." Her eyes flicked toward the living room. "Lately, though, it's been different." I wasn't sure what to say. I didn't want to overstep, so I just sipped the tea she'd poured and nodded politely. Still, the way she spoke, it wasn't small talk. It felt deliberate, as if she wanted me to stay, to hear her out. After a while, she thanked me again, her hand brushing my arm briefly as she walked me to the door. "You didn't have to do that tonight, but you did. That says something about you, Alex." I drove home, replaying those words in my head, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the tea. I told myself it was just gratitude, but deep down I knew the way she looked at me carried something else. Something unspoken. A few days later, I found myself back at Harold's house. Not because he needed a ride this time, but because Laura had asked me to drop off some paperwork he'd forgotten at the shop. Honestly, I could have just left it in his locker for him the next morning, but she called the shop directly and the boss handed me the folder like it was already decided. I told myself it was no big deal. Just hand it over, say hello, and leave. But as I pulled up to the house that evening, my chest felt tighter than it should have. Maybe it was because of how she'd looked at me the last time. Or maybe because I knew Harold wouldn't be much of a barrier if he was already passed out somewhere inside. Laura opened the door before I even knocked. She must have been watching from the window. "Alex," she said warmly, almost like she'd been expecting me. She wore a soft sweater and jeans, casual but neat, and her hair was tied back just loosely enough to make her look younger. I handed her the folder, but she didn't just take it and close the door. Instead, she smiled and said, "You've done me another. At least let me make you some tea again or coffee this time." I hesitated, but she was already motioning me inside. I followed, telling myself it was harmless. The living room was quiet, no sound from Harold. She led me to the kitchen again, put the kettle on, and slid a chair out for me at the table. "So," she said, leaning against the counter while the water heated, "how's the new job treating you? Still surviving the chaos?" I chuckled nervously. "Yeah, I'm getting the hang of it. The guys are good to me." She tilted her head, studying me the way she had before. "You're polite. I like that. You listen. You don't talk just to fill silence. That's rare these days." I shrugged awkwardly, not sure how to respond. "I just try to learn what I can." Her eyes lingered on me a little too long. Then almost casually, she added, "And you've got a good presence. People must notice that about you." The kettle whistled, snapping me out of the strange tension. She poured the tea, set the cup in front of me, then sat down across the table. Her smile was warm, but her gaze didn't feel like the kind you give a guest. Felt heavier, more deliberate. I sipped my tea quickly, avoiding her eyes. "Thanks for this," I said. "Bud, I should probably get going soon." She leaned forward slightly, resting her chin on her hand. "You don't have to rush off. Harold's upstairs. He won't be up for hours." Her tone was light, but the way she said it made my pulse race. I forced a polite smile and looked away. "Still, I've got an early shift tomorrow." She laughed softly, a low sound that lingered in the room. "Of course, you're responsible. That's another thing I like about you." I didn't know where to put my hands. My fingers tapped nervously on the mug, and I finally stood up, trying to make it seem casual. "Thanks again for the tea. I should go." She didn't stop me, but as I reached the door, she said, "Alex." I turned. She stood there in the doorway, arms folded loosely, her smile small but knowing. "You're a good young man. Don't let anyone take that from you." I nodded quickly, muttered something like, "Thanks," and stepped out into the cool evening air. My face felt hot the whole drive home, like I'd done something wrong, even though I hadn't. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the conversation had carried more weight than it should have. Her compliments, her looks, the way she lingered in her words, it all felt intentional. And as much as I tried to brush it off, I knew deep down this wasn't the end of it. A few weeks after that evening at Laura's, the shop decided to celebrate hitting a big milestone. The boss had landed a lucrative contract with a local company, which meant steady work for months. To mark the occasion, he told everyone to meet at a bar downtown after closing time. It wasn't fancy, dim lights, sticky floors, and old rock songs playing from a jukebox, but it was the kind of place where mechanics could cut loose without worrying about appearances. I didn't plan on staying late. I figured I'd have a couple drinks, show my face, and head home. But once I walked in, the energy of the place pulled me in. The younger guys were already loud, shouting over each other, while the older crew sat back in their booths, nursing beers with quiet grins. Harold was there, too, of course, with a glass in his hand like it belonged there permanently. I slid into the mix easily. A round was shoved into my hand before I even ordered, and someone slapped me on the back, calling me rookie. For a while, it was just laughter, pool games, and the warm blur of alcohol setting in. Then I saw her, Laura. She walked in like she belonged, not awkward or out of place at all. A couple of the wives had joined earlier, so it wasn't strange that she came, but still the way she lit up the room was hard to ignore. She wore a simple dress, nothing flashy, but she carried herself with confidence. Her smile was bright, her laugh carried over the music, and for some reason, my chest tightened when her eyes found mine. She made her way over, greeting a few people along the way, and then stopped right in front of me. "Alex," she said, her voice cheerful, but lower than usual as if meant just for me. "Didn't expect to see you here." I shrugged, trying to play it cool. Figured I'd celebrate with the rest. She leaned a little closer. "Good. You work hard." Her words, the way she said them, the slight brush of her hand on my arm, it all made the noise of the bar fade for a moment. I laughed nervously, glanced around to see if anyone noticed, but everyone was wrapped up in their own fun. As the night wore on, she drifted back and forth between groups, but her attention always circled back to me. A smile from across the room, a lingering glance, small touches that felt anything but accidental. I tried to ignore it at first, but the drink stalled my guard. The longer it went, the more I found myself drawn to her. At one point, she leaned in close while we stood near the jukebox. "You know," she said, her lips almost brushing my ear, "you're too quiet for your own good. Makes me curious what's going on in that head of yours." I swallowed hard, trying to think of a safe reply, but all I managed was a shaky laugh. The next thing I knew, we were slipping away from the crowd. It happened almost without words. Her hand brushing mine, her eyes holding me a second too long. The unspoken invitation. We ended up in the restroom at the back of the bar. the music and laughter muffled by the door. It was reckless, messy, and nothing like the careful lines I had tried to keep before. And yet, in that cramped space, the tension that had been building finally broke. When it was over, we straightened ourselves up and looked at each other without speaking. Her smile was small, but her eyes were alive, almost daring me to regret it. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and followed her back out into the noise of the bar. After that night at the bar, things shifted in a way I couldn't take back. Once a line is crossed, it doesn't uncross itself. I told myself it was just a one-time thing, just the alcohol, just a mistake we'd both laugh off in our own heads. But the next time I saw Laura, the look she gave me told me it wasn't going to stop there. It started subtle, a text here and there, nothing explicit, nothing someone could screenshot and use against us, just casual little check-ins. How's your day? Don't work too hard. If you're in the neighborhood, stop by for a tea. But beneath those harmless words, I could feel the pull. One afternoon, Harold stayed late at the shop, wrestling with a stubborn transmission. I knew Laura was alone. I don't even remember what excuse I made, but I found myself pulling into her driveway, my heart racing like I was doing something criminal. She opened the door before I even knocked, her smile soft, but knowing like she'd been waiting. Inside, the house was calm, lit by the low glow of a lamp. We sat in the kitchen at first, sipping tea like the first time, but conversation didn't stretch long. It wasn't needed. Her hand brushed mine, then lingered. The air tightened between us, and soon enough, I wasn't thinking about tea anymore. From then on, it became a rhythm. Sometimes I'd stop by when Harold worked late. Sometimes she found excuses to be in the area and would swing by my place. Those times felt even stranger. Her standing in my small apartment, looking out of place, but at ease all the same. She'd sit on my couch like she'd always belonged there, like this wasn't something fragile and dangerous. We never made plans far ahead. That was part of it. The unpredictability, the thrill. A random text could flip my whole evening upside down. A call late at night could have me reaching for my keys before I thought twice. And always, when it happened, it carried the same rush. At the shop, nothing changed on the surface. Harold and I worked side by side, sweat and grease masking the secret hanging between us. He'd sometimes pat me on the back, call me kid, and I'd force a smile while my stomach twisted. Every time I looked at him, I felt the weight of what I was doing pressing heavier on me. But then my phone would buzz later with her name on the screen, and that guilt melted into something else entirely. It wasn't love. At least I told myself it wasn't. There were no whispered promises, no talk of futures, no pretending this was more than it was. It was raw, reckless, and temporary. But that didn't stop it from pulling me in again and again. I started noticing the little risks we took. A neighbor waving as I pulled into her driveway. A coworker joking about me always leaving late. Laura brushing my hand in public just a moment too long. Any of those moments could have unraveled everything. Yet somehow they didn't. Every time we parted, I thought maybe that would be the last. I'd drive home telling myself I was done, that I couldn't keep doing this. But then a few days later, I'd find myself back in the same place, caught in the same cycle. Looking back, I think that's what defined those weeks. A double life balanced on the thinnest edge, fueled by temptation, silenced by secrecy. We weren't building anything. We were just burning time, playing with fire, pretending we wouldn't get burned. By the time a couple of months had passed, I had become an expert at pretending. At the shop, I laughed with the guys, swapped stories about weekends, and worked shoulder to shoulder with Harold, as if nothing in the world was unusual. But underneath, my days were split into two separate lives. The one everyone saw and the one I was trying to keep hidden. Laura and I never made it official, never called it anything, but the pattern was too obvious to ignore. A phone call late at night, a message slipped in during my lunch break, or a quiet you around would be enough to set things in motion. Sometimes I'd swing by her place when I knew Harold had gone for drinks after work. Other times, she'd show up at mine unannounced, knocking softly like she already knew I wouldn't turn her away. There was no script, no promises, no talk of where it was heading. It was just us filling a void in different ways. For her, maybe it was the excitement, the attention. For me, it was the thrill of doing something I knew I shouldn't. And as wrong as it felt, I couldn't deny the pull. At work, Harold would hand me a wrench or crack a joke, and I'd feel that flash of guilt gnaw at me. He trusted me. Everyone did. And yet, when I saw Laura's name light up my phone, the guilt gave way to something heavier, something that pushed me forward, no matter how much I told myself to stop. It started to get complicated in little ways. One afternoon, Laura texted me while I was standing next to Harold. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and he grinned at me, saying, "What? Girlfriend already keeping tabs on you?" I laughed it off, but my palms were sweaty the whole time. I knew how easy it would be for one slip to expose everything. Even outside of work, I felt the weight. Friends would ask me to hang out, but I'd find excuses. I was always waiting on the next time she'd call, always rearranging my schedule for something I couldn't even explain to anyone. And the strangest part was the silence between us. We never said the words that would make it more than what it was. No, I miss you or I need you. Just moments strung together, held in place by secrecy. It was physical, not emotional. Or at least that's what I kept repeating to myself. But the truth was, every time we parted, I felt more tangled, more trapped between who I wanted to be and what I was actually doing. The shop carried on as if nothing was different. Engines came in broken, left fixed. Customers came and went, smiling at Harold's expertise and patting me on the back for being the helpful younger guy. From the outside, everything looked normal. Inside, I felt like I was walking a tightrope with no net. Sometimes, I'd catch myself staring at Harold, wondering if he knew, wondering if maybe Laura had slipped or if some detail in my behavior had given me away. But he never looked suspicious. If anything, he treated me better as time went on, like I was proving myself to him. That only made it worse. The respect in his eyes colliding with the secret I was carrying. The guilt didn't stop me, though. I'd like to say it did. That I had the strength to walk away right then. But the truth is, I kept answering her calls, kept opening the door when she knocked because part of me wanted it even while another part was telling me it was wrong. That was the reality of my life then. Two worlds stacked on top of each other. One steady and simple, the other reckless and dangerous. And for a while, I managed to keep them both spinning, even though deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before something snapped. I didn't expect to meet anyone. That's probably why it hit me harder when I did. Her name was Emily. She wasn't connected to the shop or to Harold or to Laura. She came into my life from somewhere completely separate. We met through a mutual friend at a cookout. The kind of casual weekend hangout where you don't expect much more than burgers, cheap beer, and small talk. Emily stood out without trying. She had this easy laugh, the kind that made people turn their heads just to hear it again. She asked me about my work, about where I grew up, and when I told her I fixed cars, she didn't just nod politely. She asked real questions, curious about what I liked about it. Nobody had done that before. Most people just saw it as greasy work. We started texting after that night. Nothing heavy at first, just simple check-ins, little jokes, but it grew quickly. She asked if I wanted to grab coffee one Saturday, and I agreed. That coffee turned into dinner a week later, which turned into weekends spent together, which turned into her feeling like a part of my life before I realized how much I wanted her there. Being around her felt different. There were no secrets, no sneaking, no second-guessing myself every 5 minutes. I could just talk. We could just, and that simplicity made me see how twisted up I'd let things get with Laura. But letting go wasn't immediate. For a while, I lived in a strange overlap. Emily pulling me forward into something real. Laura tugging me back into the shadows we'd built together. My phone would buzz with Emily's name and I'd smile without hesitation. Then it would buzz with Laura's and that familiar weight would press against my chest. I knew I couldn't keep both. The more I saw Emily, the clearer it became. She made me feel steady, like I was finally building towards something instead of just running in circles. And once that realization set in, the guilt about Laura grew sharper. I started pulling back slowly, a little less responsive to Laura's texts, a little more vague about my schedule. When she asked if I could stop by, I'd make excuses. At first, She seemed to accept it with a shrug, but there was something in her tone, a hint of disappointment that I couldn't ignore. Emily, on the other hand, was patient without even trying. She didn't demand all my time, but she made the time we had feel meaningful. Late-night drives, sitting by the water, laughing over nothing. It wasn't complicated, and that's exactly what I needed. One night, lying awake in bed, I realized something that should have been obvious long before. Laura and I were never heading anywhere. It wasn't a love story. It wasn't even friendship. It was just a secret that felt exciting until it didn't. Emily, though, she made me think about the future, about where I wanted to be, not just what I wanted in the moment. So I made the decision. Quietly, without announcing it, I chose Emily. That didn't mean Laura disappeared. Every so often, she'd still call or text like she wasn't ready to let go. And every time, I felt that flicker of the old temptation. But I held the line because deep down I knew enough was enough. It wasn't easy. Part of me hated the way I left things, unfinished, unspoken. But another part of me felt lighter with each day I stayed away. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe without checking over my shoulder. Emily didn't know the details of what I was walking away from, and I didn't plan on telling her. All she needed to know was that I was present, that I wasn't distracted anymore, and for the first time I was ready to give that. It didn't happen all at once, but over time the weight started to lift. I noticed that one ordinary afternoon at the shop. We were closing up, tools clanging back into their places, the smell of grease and metal lingering in the air. The boss called out, "Alex, can you give Harold a ride? He's had a long day." For a second I froze. That old familiar sense of obligation crept in. I'd been here before, too many times, hauling Harold into my car, carrying him inside, running straight into Laura's world like a moth to a flame. But this time was different. I glanced at Harold, slouched in his chair, eyes glazed, words slurring as he tried to joke with the younger guys. Then I looked at one of the newer hires, a kid maybe 19, eager to prove himself, still shining from the excitement of his first real job. "Hey," I said, tossing him my keys. "You're up. Take him home tonight. Good practice." The boss raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. The kid nodded quickly, almost too eager, and walked Harold toward the door. I stayed behind, sweeping up stray bolts from the floor, moving slow, letting the moment settle in. And just like that, it clicked. I wasn't tied to that routine anymore. That duty didn't belong to me, and neither did the temptation that always came with it. On the drive home that night, I rolled the windows down and let the air hit my face. No phone buzzing in my pocket, no anxious thoughts about who might be waiting for me. Just the road, the hum of the engine, and a strange lightness in my chest. Emily had texted earlier asking if I wanted to grab dinner after work. I found myself smiling at the thought, not nervous, not conflicted, just looking forward to it. That's when I realized the chapter with Laura was truly closed. Not because of a dramatic fight or a confession or some big moment. It ended quietly with me choosing not to walk through the same door I had before. I knew she might still reach out. Maybe she'd call on a night when Harold had gone too far with the bottle again, or send a text that carried more weight than it should. And maybe some part of me would always feel that old pull, but I also knew I didn't owe that part of myself anything anymore. What I wanted now was stability, something honest, and that meant saying no to the kind of chaos I'd been letting myself live in. Back at the shop, nothing changed on the surface. Engine still came in broken, left fixed. The guys still laughed, still teased me about being the rookie, even though I wasn't new anymore. Harold still showed up every morning, sometimes shaky, sometimes sharp as ever. The rhythm of the place rolled on like it always had. But inside me, everything felt different. I wasn't carrying the same secret, wasn't balancing two lives on top of each other. I was just me again. Alex, the guy trying to build something real. Not the kid chasing a thrill he couldn't admit out loud. That night, sitting across from Emily at a little diner, I caught myself smiling for no reason. She raised an eyebrow and asked what was so funny. I shook my head, said it was nothing, but the truth was it was everything. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I stepped onto solid ground, and that was enough. The story of Alex and Laura is a raw emotional journey through the allure of forbidden temptation and the transformative power of choosing authenticity over chaos. Alex, a 24-year-old mechanic, finds himself entangled in a reckless affair with Laura, the poised wife of his coworker Harold. Sparked by fleeting moments of connection, tea in her kitchen, a stolen encounter in a bar, their secret, fueled by thrill and silenced by guilt, reveals a profound lesson. The pursuit of fleeting excitement can trap us in a cycle of deception. But true growth comes from recognizing when to walk away towards something honest. Alex's decision to choose Emily, a woman who offers stability and genuine connection over the dangerous pull of Laura, underscores the courage it takes to prioritize a life built on truth rather than fleeting passion. His quiet choice to step away from Laura's world, marked by a moment of passing the responsibility of driving Harold home to another, signifies a reclaiming of his integrity. This narrative resonates with anyone who's faced the temptation of something thrilling yet wrong, urging us to seek connections that ground us rather than unravel us, and to find strength in choosing a path that aligns with our true selves, even when it means letting go. If Alex and Laura's story of temptation and redemption stirred your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to walk away from something thrilling to choose what's real? Hit the like button if their journey moved you, and subscribe for more stories that capture the raw essence of human choices. Join our community to keep these narratives alive. Let's celebrate the courage to build a life of honesty and connection.